Go.
Okay, here we are on Wall Street and Broad Street. Over there, Broad Street is named Broad Street because it is wider. Originally, it was a canal draining sort of this swampy area into the ocean, which makes a lot of sense. This was a Dutch colony originally in the 1620s, 30s, 40s, 50s. The Dutch called it New Amsterdam, and in Old Amsterdam, what do they have? A lot of canals. So they're used to digging canals for irrigation, for draining things. They're experts at this. In fact, last year during the hurricane, we probably could have used a lot of Dutch assistance. One of my friends in Holland, who's an engineer, he had a lot of advice for the city of New York on how to deal with flooding. So Broad Street is so broad because it was originally a canal. You can imagine all of this being sort of swampy wilderness with trees and shrubs and things like that. Wall Street is named for a wall, and you can actually see in the middle of the street, there are wooden blocks that mark where that wall would have been. A wooden palisade, a fence, sort of fortress with spiky things on top, blocking across the entire island from one side to the other. And you can see Wall Street goes all the way down there and opens up, and you can see actually Brooklyn in the distance. The wall was here to keep out the British, primarily. Sort of to keep out the Indians, but mostly it was because they were afraid of the British. The Indians they were trading with, they were here to make money, they weren't here to conquer or make war. But this wall helps to symbolize, again, and this location, Wall Street, again, the history of the city and how the character of New York and Wall Street was established right from the very beginning. This wall, the palisade, helps to symbolize a city that was full of pirates, and the city itself that was founded by the Dutch West India Company, which was founded to make money. Unlike Philadelphia or Boston or Plymouth or any of these places, New York was not founded for religious freedom. It was founded for money, to make a buck. The Dutch came here not for any kind of high-minded ideals. It wasn't based on the Enlightenment or any of that stuff from the beginning. It was based on cold, hard cash. Or in the case of New York, beaver pelts and, shells and oysters and timber and all these kinds of natural resources that they can make a lot of money off of. New Amsterdam was a pirate town. The area below Wall Street is not that big of an area, and eventually it filled in with all kinds of crooked, windy streets, which I'm sure you're familiar. If you go in there, you get really lost really quick. But these winding, narrow streets were full of early capitalists here to make a buck, and it was a pirate city. The pirates, Dutch pirates, were trying to rob the Spanish up and down the coast, all across the Atlantic. Holland and Spain were at war at the time, so that makes a lot of sense. Later on, the British take over the colony, they tear down the wall, put a street in its place, but it still continues to be effectively a pirate town. Captain Kidd lived here, for example. And the British pirates were mostly attacking the French because the British and the French were at war, but they're still pirates nonetheless. And in a very early New York Wall Street tradition, you could actually invest in a pirate ship mission. You can invest your money in a pirate ship, help them to buy guns and a ship and supplies. They send them out, they rob some Spanish ship or some French ship or some other ship, and they come back with booty, and you get to have a share of it. So stock shares, investing in dubious businesses or cutthroat businesses or piratical businesses. A lot of criticism people have for Wall Street today, for the stock exchange today, for bankers today, goes right back to the very beginning of it. And in New York, in New Amsterdam, the main morality was do what you can to get ahead. Make a buck any way you can. You come here to make a better life. We don't care what religion you are. We don't care what country you're from. We don't even care what language you speak. From the very beginning, there were dozens of languages in New Amsterdam and then New York. We don't care about any of that. You have to be self-sufficient, make your own money, and do whatever it takes to get there. So, it's quite fitting that the original stock exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, was started on Wall Street, under a buttonwood tree, down this way just a little bit where I think there's a Deutsche Bank today. But halfway down this street, people got together and started trading stock, trading shares, pieces of ownership of companies, which made doing business less risky for each person, but much more profitable for everybody. Eventually, It found its permanent home over here on Broad Street, so you can go home and tell everyone that you found out that Wall Street, the stock market, is not actually on Wall Street, it's on Broad Street, but close enough. The New York Stock Exchange building here, constructed at the turn of the 20th century, has a neoclassical Roman Greekish pediment on the top, a testament to, the classical history of the United States, the Enlightenment, all these wonderful high-minded ideals. But really, it's the stock exchange. It's here to make money. The building right next to it was added on in the 1920s because they were doing so well financially, we needed more space for offices. And so if you've heard those stories of the stock crash in 1929, of the stockbrokers jumping out their windows when they hear the news or when they see the stock prices crash, if anybody were to jump out of a window to their death, they couldn't really jump out of the main stock exchange itself. But Wall Street comes to mean any of these buildings all around here in this general vicinity. Bankers and stock traders would be looking at that ticker tape that we talked about earlier and seeing the news in real time, and then tragically giving up on life knowing that they had ruined the financial well-being of all these other people. Always a dramatic place, much like Captain Kidd from the very beginning in the Pirates, all the way through to today. The financial district that we're in, the financial sector of New York, really has a grip on the well-being of the entire world. And that's why you see so much security. I'm sure when we were walking in you saw security guards and police officers and car bomb stuff. This area has to be secure. If anything were to happen to this area, the stock exchange that has the highest volume in terms of volume and in terms of dollar value, the highest volume and amounts of, it's the biggest stock exchange in the world. So in that sense, if this were to fall apart, we would all be doomed. Even those of us that don't have our money directly involved. You're involved, because we're all involved. Behind you, you're sitting on the steps of Federal Hall. Originally would have been City Hall for the British city of New York. Eventually became Federal Hall after we got independence. Became the first place where George Washington, you see his statue up here to your right, took the oath of office to become the first president of the United States. Why is he taking the oath of office in New York and not Washington, D.C.? Because New York was the capital, the first capital city of the country, which makes sense. It was the largest city in the country. That building eventually didn't look like this, eventually was torn down, and this building replaced it as a customs house and then later a sub-treasury building. The sub-treasury building is actually interesting in terms of what we're going to talk about later, because the sub-treasury under President Abraham Lincoln was run by a guy named Chase. And he was the guy that was in charge of figuring out national currency for the first time, really effectively. He set up the greenbacks, the money with the green on the back, like we kind of have today, to help win the Civil War. And so through his financial genius and the financial workings of a lot of other bankers, we were able to tie up the Civil War and come out of it financially, economically, as a country stronger than we started, along with a lot of chaos in the South and whatnot, but that's a separate story for a separate city. So, we have the treasury, sub-treasury building, we have the stock market, and behind me here, along with all of this, you think this is an area for cutthroat greed and capitalism. We had, in the 19th century, a building that was kind of opposite to all of these things in many ways. This was the location of Downing's Oyster House. You can imagine, right here on the corner, a restaurant run by an African-American, free African-American man and his family named Downing. And he and his sons and his family ran this restaurant, and they served oysters and dinner and lunch to the traders and bankers of the neighborhood, which is kind of ironic, again, like we talked about earlier, lots of irony in this city. At the end of Wall Street was the biggest slave trading market. Right here, at the end of the street, the slave trading market, and right here, free African-American restaurant, which was actually, in actual fact, a front for the Underground Railroad, which, as you probably know, was not actually a railroad and was not actually underground, but was a secret network of people working to get escaped slaves, fugitive slaves, from their owners to freedom in the North, to freedom in a free state like New York, or up north to Maine or Massachusetts or even Canada. Once you're freed as a slave, or once you escape as a slave, you're not actually good to go because someone could always kidnap you and bring you back to slavery. So one of the things men like Downing did, they'd give you a new identity, they'd give you some skills, they'd help you to get a new lifestyle, a new profession, a new identity, and then help you move further north. And he was doing all of this right under the noses of, for a while, slave traders and Wall Street investors up and down the street who had a great deal of money invested in the plantation economy. So New York, it's a city of immorality, it's a city of capitalist greed, but it's also a city of activism and protest, and a city of wonderful people doing immensely moral things, like Mr. Downing. Even if they have to do it secretly and not get any credit for it, there's actually a lot of heart underneath the stern surface of the serious New Yorker. Move on.